Hello networkers, and welcome back to another episode of Ask the Network Engineer, where I will answer one of your questions. And let's do one more video for this year before I wrap things up. Been a great year, and you guys are a big part of that in answering or asking a lot of great questions, and me facilitating and giving you guys my experience and advice for what you guys should do. So this question here is from Christian, and he asked, can you provide some real world network tickets, like support tickets? I've never seen these anywhere on videos. So that's a great question. Basically, he's asking, provide real world tickets or issues that network engineers may encounter. So before I actually do that, I won't do that in this episode, but I want to kind of set the framework. And I want to talk about support, but more from a support strategy. How do you troubleshoot? I think in a previous episode, I talked about you got to have a strategy for how you do things. Configuration, design, even with troubleshooting. So I want to provide you my strategy of how I troubleshoot problems, networking problems. And it may come off very simple, but that's the whole point. Nothing needs to be overly complicated. Everything is simple if you really think about it. I think a lot of people, they try to make things very, very simple. I think I saw a video on YouTube about this one guy, and Albert Einstein said the same thing. If you can't explain things in simple terms, then you do not understand the subject matter. Now, I'm a big fan of Albert Einstein and astronomy and physics, so I take that really to heart. And that's what I try to do. It's a learning curve for me as well. How can I explain things in very simple terms that people can understand? I do that for advanced technologies. I try to do that for our training program. So I like to share with you basically how I deal with troubleshooting problems. So let's get started. Okay, so the main thing when it comes to troubleshooting a problem, when something breaks, okay, it is usually going to be one or more of three things, okay? So whenever something is broken, you gotta tell yourself it is one or more of these things. So that's pretty simple, right? Well, what are these three things? So the first kind of problem, which is most likely to be the main problem, is what I call a change event. And I'll explain what that means. The second likely cause will be what is called a software event. And the third will be a hardware event. So an issue will be with one or more of these type of situations. So you got to figure out which one it could be. So what is a change event? So most problems will be with a recent change that has occurred on the network or somewhere along the path. So like, for example, if someone makes a configuration change and things are broken, well, the recent change is the result of that problem. That is the biggest one I've seen, is a recent change. It can also be with a power outage. A power outage inflicts a particular change because with power, the equipment was running just fine. Whether if there's a power outage, then that actually impacts service. So that is a recent change. Maybe there's an outage with the ISP or a WAN connection or an internet circuit is down. That is considered as a recent change. If a DNS server is down and that DNS server is basically a dependency for other things to work, that is also a recent change. Now, a software change is more of what we call like a software bug. Those are going to happen. And you know how we solve those problems? Well, usually there's two ways for solving that. Actually three ways. One, you reboot the device and magically it just works again, right? That happens a lot in this industry, right? Technology is not 100% reliable, okay? It's simply not. And rebooting it kind of clears things up and make things operational again. Happens with Windows computers, servers, Macs, routers, switches, firewalls. Rebooting definitely is a big thing. Or another resolution to that is doing a software upgrade or maybe a downgrade, depending on what features are enabled. Then you get to a hardware change event. And for a hardware change event, this is something that is hardware related. A power supply is bad. The router or firewall is bad. A module is bad. A port is bad. Those things can actually happen, but they are more rare. So if there's an issue, it is more likely related to some kind of a recent change event. Then it could be a software event, or really rarely, it could be a hardware event. So that is basically what I look for to figure out what it could be. When you're troubleshooting a problem, you need to understand all of the components. And you do that by understanding what are all of the parts for something to work along the path, including any dependency. So, very simple example, a user trying to access the internet. What are the main parts for that? Well, there's going to be the computer itself. And yes, you can say there's the computer, there's the operating system, there's the network card. You can go down to those details, but basically it's the computer itself. Then there's going to be the actual switch that they'll be connected to. Then there'll be the actual network, which could be a series of other switches that are meshed together. There could be a router involved along the path. There could be a firewall. There's also the actual cables, the Ethernet cables that are basically wired within the switches, the routers, the firewalls, the computers. Then you have the connection up to the ISP. Another part could be with DNS or other servers or other kind of appliances that are basically in line. You want to identify all of the major parts for something. And that's really where you troubleshoot. Once you understand all of the major parties and all of the major parts basically, then you need to figure out where is the root cause. Is it with the computer? Is it with the cable? Is it with the switch, the router, the firewall, the internet connection, the ISP itself, DNS, the server? That makes it easier to kind of focus on where the issue could be. And then from there, from those parts, you can then determine, was there a recent change? Is there a potential software event, or is there a hardware event? And with that information, you can then do what is called a process of elimination. I've been doing this since the very, very beginning. It's like kind of doing like a investigation, a CSI or NCIS kind of investigation to figure out which one is the culprit, which one is causing the problem that we're trying to solve here. And that's really what it is. So let's say that, and this is very common, a user cannot access the internet, right? And there's a lot of different parts to make that happen. Well, with process of elimination, I can do things like, okay, so user 1 can't access the internet. What about user 2? If they can access the internet and I can access the internet from maybe my computer, then I likely know for sure that the other components like the cables and the switches and the routers and the internet connection and DNS, those are likely not the culprits. It is probably something with that computer or how that computer is set up. And that could be maybe there was a recent change on that computer. Maybe it's using a wrong DNS server. That's considered as a recent change event. Maybe there is a hardware issue on that computer or a software issue. Maybe they install something new on that computer. You know, that happens all the time. Depends if the computers are not locked down. If they install various software, it could impact how they access various services. So the point is doing a process of elimination really helps you to know where you should be focused on. So let me provide a couple of examples using the strategy and the elimination. And these are real life tickets that has actually come up in the past month or so, okay? So the first ticket or issue that has come up recently was, this is a big one, and as a network engineer, this is very, very common. A user or users reported that everything is slow. It takes forever to do things. Now that's really open-ended because, well, what do you mean slow? But keep in mind that as a user, they're not going to give you the technical details of that. That's not their job. That's your job, okay, to try to figure out, try to narrow down what could be the actual problem and to resolve it in a very short period of time, because this can be very frustrating when things are very, very slow. So, okay, sure, me and my team, we went ahead and looked at the issue and kind of asked a very simple question. Is it for internal resources that things feel slow, like accessing a local server, printing, copying files to a local server, things like that? Or is it just slowness to the internet? So the issue was to the internet itself. Everything internally was perfectly fine, basically wired speed. But to the internet, it was very, very sluggish. Okay, so now we have established what's going on here. Let's identify all of the components involved. And I kind of talked about that before. So great, we got computers, there's the cables, they have a they have a two-tier LAN topology, a spine and leaf topology with a lot of access layers that connects to a beefy core, and the core connects to a firewall, and firewall connects to the internet. There's DNS, there's servers. So great, we identified all of the components. Let's try to do a process of elimination now. And we have to understand that the problem is going to be, again, one of three things. It's going to be a recent change event, a software event, or a hardware event. So the first thing was looking at the actual computer, the user that reported the issue that the internet is slow. And sure enough, they have experienced that the internet is slow. We're seeing packet drops when we're doing pings and trace routes. And we're seeing latency in terms of 200-300 milliseconds. You're right, there's a lot of stuff going on there. But let's see if it's not with this computer, maybe it's with everybody. Let's just figure this out. So going to other computers, even with my own laptop connected to the environment, I noticed the same thing. So it's not delusional. The user computers are all experiencing the same thing. So that is not the issue. It's not bad cables. So then what do you do next? We're troubleshooting along the path to figure out who could be the culprit. So I log on to the switches. I log on to the local switches there. The next one is the firewall. And looking at the switches in terms of the logs, the buffer, like any buffer failures. We're looking at the CPU, looking at the memory. We're looking at our SNMP tools, looking at NetFlow, specifically to see if there's anything that is generating congestion within the LAN. Well, remember, access to all the internal resources, the large server farms, that sort of thing, is perfectly fine. So, and of course, the switches didn't reflect any problems at all. They were operating normally like it was any other normal day. So probably the issue is not there. So went ahead and looked at the firewall and did the same kind of thing, right? You look at the security logs, you look at the CPU, the resources, the interface, how much bandwidth is being utilized, and that seems fine as well. So we're doing all of that, trying to figure out where the issue could be. Okay, so great. So far, everything seems to be operating fine. So what do you do now? So what I do now is, the problem is with the internet connection itself. And what is the actual component that connects to the internet from the internal network? That's the firewall. Even though the firewall reports everything is perfectly fine, there's something with that internet connection, because that's what's slow, not the internal network. So I connect my laptop directly into the internet connection. Actually, what it is, they have like a managed router, okay? And the managed router has an Ethernet feed, and there's a couple of ports on there. Great, so I actually took my laptop and plugged directly into one of those ports, bypassing the firewall. And let's go ahead and do a ping, trace routes, and see what the internet looks like. Maybe there's a problem with the internet connection. Maybe there's an internet issue itself with a particular peer that's causing problems. But when I connect my laptop and start doing some tests, the internet is perfectly fine. I'm not getting timeouts. I'm not getting latency in the 200-300 millisecond range. Interesting. When I connect my laptop behind the firewall and ping the internet, I get latency. But in front of it, I do not get latency. Who could be the culprit now? It's the firewall. The firewall is doing something that isn't working. So now we identified it as the firewall. So is it now a recent change event? Is it a software event or is it a hardware event? So at first glance, there is no hardware related issue with the firewall. There's no bad power supply, there's no bad ports or interfaces, everything reflects up, nothing is flapping or going up and down. So that part is true. So we can eliminate that. So it's either a recent change or a software related event. So we said, okay, it could be maybe a bug. Maybe we need to upgrade the iOS or the OS on the firewall to the latest. Maybe that's required. But let's just first do a reboot just to get that out of the way. Okay, let's just do a quick reboot because we're not seeing anything in the logs on the firewall that reflects that there is a problem causing the latency that we are seeing. So we rebooted that device and it did not solve the problem. Okay, but it could still be a software bug or a faulty image. So, okay, recent change or software event is one of those two things. So exploring this further, we realized that there was a recent change event that the day before, which we did not know about, somebody upgraded the firmware on the firewall. They just upgraded, and that raises a suspicion because the version before, we know it works. You do an upgrade, these issues are reported. So that is very likely the possible issue. So we can either downgrade and go back to the previous version, or we can do an upgrade if an upgrade is even available. And there was. So great, let's upgrade to that version. So we went ahead and did an upgrade to the firmware, rebooted the firewall, and the problem was solved. It was related to, basically it was two things. Remember, it could be one or more of these three things. It was a recent change because someone did a software upgrade, which meant that it was something new in the environment that was basically unproven and untested. And basically it was a software event because it was related to some kind of a software bug. Something with that image just wasn't working that caused the issues of high latency. So again, we solved the issue by, again, upgrading the firmware to the next version that we were able to upgrade to. So those are two good examples to kind of get the ball rolling. This is, I think, a good opportunity because we can do additional episodes of other troubleshooting tickets that I encounter and how you can troubleshoot that with the strategy and identifying the components, how to do process of elimination. When you're doing those kind of things, it kind of makes it easier to focus on how to troubleshoot. So there'll be a lot more of these kind of videos in the future. So it's a really, really good question. And we are done with this episode. So if you have any questions about being a network engineer or anything in the networking field, I'd love to hear from you guys. Post those questions below in the comments and it will come up in the future episode or speed round on this channel. So I want to wish you guys happy holidays, happy New Year's. And before the year ends, take this time to reflect on what you have learned as a network engineer or on your journey for this past year in 2016. Figure out what has worked, what isn't working, and then try to figure out a particular plan of how to get there. That's really what I do each year. I kind of, for the last 2 weeks in December, I kind of reflect on what have I learned as a network engineer? What are the things I like to improve on or additional things I like to learn moving forward? So think about that, and I'd love to hear from you guys. Post your questions below in terms of what you have learned and what you want to do better in 2017. And hopefully those questions, we can address them very early on in 2017 and get the ball rolling on your journey for being a network engineer. So thank you for watching this video. If you can, please like, share, and subscribe. That would mean a lot. And support us. It means a lot on routhub.net. And until next time, keep networking, and I'll see you guys in 2017.